Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Christopher Adams. On behalf of St. Paul's College, the University of Manitoba, and the Arthur V. Morrow Center for Peace and Justice, I want to welcome all of you to the 2018 Sol Kanee Lecture on Peace and Justice, as well as the Night Lecture for 2018. This year's lecture will be given by Nobel Prize Laureate Jody Williams and founding chair of the Nobel Women's Initiative. Professor Williams will be speaking on the topic of women supporting women in the pursuit of peace. Before we begin, I wish to note that we are located upon the land of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, Territory 1, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and the mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. The Sol Kanee Lecture Series on Peace Building is supported by the generosity of the Richardson Foundation and Richardson family of Winnipeg. We are grateful for their contribution to our Morrow Center and this lecture series. As well, we extend our thanks to the leadership of members of the Winnipeg community, most especially Mr. Sol Kanee, who is an ardent champion of peace building and human rights, and for whom this lecture is named after. We also want to thank the Robert and Elizabeth Knight Distinguished Visitors Program at the University of Manitoba, which has been instrumental in supporting our efforts to bring Professor Williams to Winnipeg. We would not have been able to do without that. I wish to also acknowledge our center's benefactor, Dr. Arthur V. Morrow, who is here today, along with the many others who have contributed to the work of the Morrow Center and of the faculty and students enrolled in the Peace and Conflict Studies program. Together, through all of their efforts, we have opened the door for greater opportunities to know, understand, and walk the path of peace. I also want to recognize our Morrow Center's partners, including the Rotary Club, District 5550, World Peace Partners, the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, the University of Manitoba, and St. Paul's College. Today, we are honored to have as our 2018 Sol Kanee Lecturer and Night Lecturer, Professor Jody Williams. I will now ask Dr. David Barnard, the President and Vice Chancellor of the University of Manitoba, to bring greetings.
Good afternoon. Kanee Budwapshki Mukwan Dejnikas. My spirit name is Standing White Bear, and I like to introduce myself in this traditional manner out of respect for the people of this land and for the relationships that enabled me to receive it. It's really a pleasure to welcome you all here today. As you already heard, and as you know what brought you here, we're honored to have with us Nobel Laureate and founding chair of the Nobel Women's Initiative and this year's Robert and Elizabeth Knight Distinguished Visitor, Jody Williams. I would like to add my thanks to the generosity of the Knight family. We're able to support visits to the university by individuals who've made distinguished contributions to their fields because of their generosity. We've been able to enhance the quality of education we offer by exposing our community to really an incredible diversity of remarkable people who have come for these lectures from around the world to share their experiences with us, and I'm delighted that today we're adding Jody Williams to this company. From the historic campaign that led to the banning of interpersonal landmines to the landmark UN resolution on women, peace, and security passed 18 years ago this month, Jody Williams' distinct voice brings realism to the fight for peace. She's described this realism in this way. She said, "Peace is not only the absence of armed conflict. To have sustainable peace, you have to have justice, you have to have equality, and you have to have the basic needs of people met." I think it's easy for us to understand, those of us who live in the context that we live in here, with respect to the traditional presence of Indigenous people, how true these things are. The University of Manitoba is dedicated to human rights research, and we value our connections and our partnership with the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. We're fortunate to be the home of the Arthur V. Morrow Center for Peace and Justice, the only program in Canada where students from around the world can receive a PhD on that subject. Dr. Morrow's vision for this center was for students from around the world to study together and to recognize the possibilities for a harmonious future. The University of Manitoba is committed to social justice ideals and those promoted by this lecture's remarkable namesake, Dr. Saul Kanee, and by the Arthur V. Morrow Center for Peace and Justice. And it's, repeat what was said earlier, it's a pleasure to have Dr. Morrow with us. So Jody, your visit to Winnipeg this week, your lecture this afternoon will help us continue to advance this critical conversation. We're all part of the global effort, or should be, to promote respect, inclusion, and justice. So before I conclude, I would also like to recognize and thank today's sponsors, the Richardson Foundation, our partners, the Rotary District 5550, and our ongoing partnership with the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. Only through the work that we do together can we hope to create a better future locally, nationally, and globally. So thank you for being here, and I hope you enjoy the afternoon.
Thank you, Dr. Barnard. I will now ask Dr. John Young, the President and CEO of this wonderful Canadian Museum for Human Rights, to bring greetings.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. Thank you, Dr. Adams, President Barnard, for your words. Just as a small aside, it was 30 years ago that Dr. Adams and I were graduate students together in Ottawa. We played on the same baseball team, and whenever we meet each other, we remind ourselves that we used to play on the same baseball team. I think we worry that as the years go by, we will soon forget these things, and so it's a constant reminder. In addition to the acknowledgments of our territory, I wish to add that the water you find here in the museum is sourced from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation. I too would like to thank our partner organizations, the University of Manitoba, a very steady, strong, and consistent partner in our collaborative work together, the Richardson Foundation, Rotary District 5550, World Peace Partners, the Robert and Elizabeth Knight Distinguished Visitors Program, and of course the Arthur Morrow Center for Peace and Justice. I'd like to offer an extra special greeting to Dr. Arthur Morrow. Thanks to your commitment to peace and justice, we are able to hold these kind of events, so thank you. Our mandate here at the museum is to enhance our collective understanding of human rights and to promote thoughtful reflection on their importance. So hosting public events like this that help broaden the dialogue about the importance of rights is essential to our work. And so it is a great privilege to welcome everyone here this afternoon, and in particular, Nobel Laureate and tireless activist for peace, Jody Williams. We're honored to have you with us here today. Any visitor to our museum, we hope, quickly understands that peace and rights go hand in hand. They are inseparable. And without individual rights that protect our ability to work, to get an education, to think and express ourselves, we cannot have peace. Because, as Jody Williams and others will remind us, peace is far more than just the absence of war. Peace is what happens when human life and dignity are held up as our most important objectives. Peace is what happens when we value not just the stability of nations, but the security of people. In 1997, in recognition that the security of people matters, the Ottawa Treaty to eliminate landmines and their devastating effect was signed by 122 nations. Today, 164 nations are a party to that treaty. And without the work of Jody Williams, this would not have happened. And so it is with great pleasure that we welcome Jody Williams and the Saul Kanee Lecture to the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, and to continue our work towards peace, justice, and rights together. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Young. I will no longer make references to our baseball playing at Carleton University. I will now ask Ms. Meredith Dawn to introduce our speaker. In the early 2000s, Ms. Dawn worked to raise awareness among school students and the general public about the issue of landmines and cluster munitions. She also worked directly with landmine survivors in Cambodia. In 2002, with Daryl Taves, she co-founded the Manitoba campaign to ban landmines. She holds a master's degree from the University of Manitoba. So please welcome Ms. Dawn.
I have a feeling some of this might be a little repetitive, so I apologize. Everyone can hear me all right? Okay, thanks. Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Meredith Dawn, and I'm the co-founder and former coordinator of the Manitoba Campaign to Ban Landmines, a member of the International Campaign to Ban Landmines, an organization founded and coordinated by Jody Williams. Jody and the ICBL won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1997 and has played an integral part in the achievement of the Mine Ban Treaty. This treaty compels the end of the use, production, and stockpiling of mines, and also directs countries to support survivors. The movement was one in which aimed not only at mobilizing action for the removal and destruction of an insidious weapon, but also one to promote human security. Banning landmines isn't just about the disproportionate harm they cause civilians in conflict, but it's about the long-lasting impact that they have on community development, food security, education, access to healthcare, and the development of a prosperous economy. Really, the building of long-lasting peace. The achievement is unique and important for many reasons, but one that stands out most in my view would be how grassroots organizations were able to come together with governments to develop an international treaty in record time. This model of activism has inspired further development of international law, defining methods of disarmament and procuring human rights, like the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Jody's work has continued on with success around the Cluster Munitions Coalition and currently the campaign to stop killer robots. Yes, I said stopping killer robots. Jody, while campaigning, I've had the opportunity to hear you speak about your passion on a few occasions. These are memorable in my experiences because your wit and candor are a characteristic I think has greatly contributed to the success of the campaign. Some of the messages that have resonated with me are that human security isn't the absence of war, that when ordinary people come together, they have an extraordinary impact, that we need to trust our instinct and put these feelings into action to create change, or in your words, get off your ass and do something. Jody, your work is personally inspiring, and I want to express my gratitude for being an inspirational woman of leadership in the international community. The development of the Nobel Women's Initiative is an example of using your prestige to support women who are often bearing the brunt of the consequences of conflict. I've personally seen and experienced the struggles women have faced in this global community. We need women to continue to take positions of leadership to challenge and abolish archaic ideas of conflict, such as using rape as a weapon of war. We need women in positions of leadership to take on issues such as the harassment of women in the workplace and to find ways to halt abuse of vulnerable nationals by those entrusted with power. My 9-year-old daughter is here with me today, and I wanted to show her what's possible when we work together, especially when change makers like you, Jody, are leading the way. So Mira, this is the woman who inspired your father and I to get off our asses and do something. We created the Manitoba Campaign to Ban Landmines. Pardon me. We wanted to work for peace, and this is what we were able to do. We reached thousands of students by creating activities of action in schools. We provided opportunity for volunteers to engage and use their skills for being agents of change. We raised over $50,000 for 2 projects in Rwanda and Jordan for mine risk awareness education and survivor assistance. We were able to reach over 1 million people with news articles, TV appearances, and other media events, like creating piles of shoes to represent the lost limbs of landmine survivors in public spaces. By using the messages we gained from Jody and individuals like the Honorable Lloyd Axworthy, we have in turn helped energize the youth in our community to take action. Some of the students we've worked with have gone on to become human rights lawyers, policy researchers, community activists, aid workers, social workers, get the idea, and they're all making a difference. They may not all be working in the field of disarmament, but we're making an extraordinary impact. Jody, you've helped create change makers in our province, one that holds human rights near and dear to its heart. Everyone, let's show our gratitude and welcome for an activist, professor, author, dog lover, and Nobel laureate, Jody Williams.
She almost made me cry. Oh, ruined my mascara. Something I never put on, but my mother likes me to gussy up when I'm in public, and I love my mom. She's 88, and she still rocks. This is a prop. Thanks to everybody for the kind words, and you just knocked it out of the park. Yes, and getting up off one's ass and taking action for change is fundamental to making this world a better place. So thanks for quoting that one. It's one of my faves. Even though my mother asked me not to curse in public because it tarnishes my Nobel image. Whatever that might be. Since we've already heard quite a bit about disarmament, I'm sorry there's this right in the way, so I can't really see you over there. I'm going to talk about women and resilience. Because, as was mentioned, I helped create the Nobel Women's Initiative, and we launched in January of 2006, and we're 6 women recipients of the Peace Prize who decided to come together. We all work on our individual issues still, but we decided to come together and use whatever influence and access we have by virtue of the Nobel Prize to shine a spotlight on the work of women around the world who are working in situations of conflict, be it armed conflict such as in the Democratic Republic of Congo, or the kinds of conflict we are seeing throughout Mexico and Central America with the drug lords and corruption of the governments and the obscene murder of frontline defenders of the environment throughout Mexico and Central America and South America. I mean, some of our colleagues have been killed because they tried to defend the environment, the planet that we all need to live on. And will somebody do this when I'm supposed to talk 25 or 30 minutes, but when it's like I have about 10 minutes left, because once I get going, I can spin out, you know? Thank you. For me, it has been a true privilege to have the Nobel Prize, to be able to share it with women around the world, to use it in a way that helps their voices be heard. The Nobel in and of itself, it's a cool recognition. It made my parents get off my butt about being something they could understand. They wanted me to be a lawyer so I'd be stable and economically secure. But once I was a Nobel laureate, you know, man, I walk on water, and they left me alone. But it's a journey. It's not easy. For some people, it's easy. I find that women Nobel laureates have a harder time understanding and accepting the responsibility of it. Women don't tend to feel comfortable with power, or what is perceived to be power. And I've been in so many conversations, including recently, about women and power and why we don't feel more comfortable with using it and accepting that we have it. But with the Nobel Women's Initiative, as I said, I really feel honored to work with some of the amazing women that I've met and that we continue to work with in countries around the world. I'm often asked, as are, you know, many so-called important people, which gives me a huge laugh about being important. If I am important, it is only because thousands, and in many, depending on how you count it, millions of us around the world came together to create an incredible movement that resulted in the ban of landmines. And we have to thank Canada for, you know, picking up the lead and forcing governments to negotiate the treaty. but it was all of us. We're every single person. Thank you, Manitoba campaign to ban landmines. Every single person involved in that effort and other such efforts are important because they recognize that yes, we have human rights, but we have responsibility to be active citizens, not only in our municipalities and provinces and countries, but globally to change this world that is confronting us with such insanity. And unfortunately, I am from the US. I keep hoping Canada will annex Vermont. You haven't done it yet. And of course, Mr. Trump is helping destabilize the world. As we saw in the recent, I would have to call it a horror show of the testimony of Dr. Blasey Ford, and then the weeping manliness of Mr. Kavanaugh, and he didn't curse, I don't think. I couldn't watch him, he made me ill. But the way he acted out and the way he trashed one party, showing clearly that objectivity is not exactly part of his thinking, and that is terrifying. The women that I appreciate when people ask who were your role models, Blasey Ford would be up there now, I suppose, because she had the courage to come out of obscurity and take that system on, knowing full well what would happen. There was a chance of a snowball in hell that anything said there would change the determination of the party in power to have a very conservative justice on the Supreme Court for decades to come. They said it clearly before those so-called hearings started that it didn't matter what was said. Kavanaugh was going to be the Supreme Court justice. And she is a woman of resilience. I will tell you the story of some others. This is why I have my shawl up here. One of the women who is part of the initiative is Rigoberta Menchú Tum from Guatemala. She received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1992. She is a Mayan Quiché woman, and during the 30-some-odd years of conflict in Guatemala, hundreds of thousands of indigenous people were killed, murdered, etc. In that time period, there were many women in the town of Sepersarco in Guatemala whose husbands were killed by the army, and these were campesino, indigenous people who tend to be murdered when they are trying to gain recognized rights to the land that they have been farming forever, right? So these men were struggling to get recognition to be able to, with security, continue to farm the land that they had been farming. And of course, part of the reason of the war in Guatemala was over land. And the military came in, Sepersarco, and built a garrison for R&R for the soldiers. And the first thing they did was kill the men who were in the leadership of the efforts to claim their land. And then they took the women who were the wives of these men and turned them into sex and domestic slaves. For a period of at least 2 years, they were required, in shifts, if you can even imagine this, to go to the garrison and do all the cooking and cleaning, etc. And also in the night to service, if you will, whatever men had to have their needs met. You can imagine the impact on the community, on the families of the women and the women themselves. These are women with absolutely no education. Women who live in huts of dirt floors, grass, roofs. I've been to visit them. No running water. And their lives were devastated, torn apart. they're quiet for a few years because the community ostracized them, which is very often the case when women are raped in war. They were ostracized, and some people said that they weren't being used as sex slaves, they were prostitutes. They went willingly to, have their way with multiple soldiers to get money to feed their children. So they were quiet. But slowly they started to talk to each other. And they started to share with each other, what had happened to them. And it took many years of talking, and I don't know, many who have gone through trauma live the trauma in a very difficult way, and it is lessened to a degree when you get to share that trauma with others who really know what you're talking about. So these women, as they talked with each other about the horror, they became stronger and stronger. And finally, they came to the conclusion that they had to try to bring a case against some of the military who ran that garrison. And these are 15 Mayan women who only speak, Quechua. They were a different language group of the Mayans. They only spoke Quechua. But they are going to bring a case. And once they started to speak out a little more publicly, 3 women's organizations in Guatemala decided to work with them to help, move a case forward. One of the groups was for social workers for the psychological aspect. The middle group I cannot remember, I'm really sorry. And the third group was women lawyers. Once they became involved, it took 6 years to get from the point of deciding to engage to court. And the trial itself was to last for a month. Rigoberta Menchú was there every day for the first 3 weeks, and then I get a call. And she said, Jody, please, if you can, will you please come to Guatemala? It's the last week, and people are not paying as much attention, and this is a fundamental case for the future of this country. And I love her anyway, so I got on a plane and I went. And the first night that I'm there, Rigoberta and I meet with these women, and they're in like a circle like this. And they are all sitting like this, like their hands are in supplication. And we asked them, why are you doing this? And each one, the responses were very similar. Because we believe in justice. We want justice. We don't want our children to live through this. We don't want any other woman in Guatemala, any other Mayan woman, to have to experience what we experienced. And they mostly looked down. They were all a good 10 years younger than I was, and they looked 20 years older than I do. One of them was so emaciated, she looked like a mummy. I just kept thinking of the Egyptian mummies I've seen in museums. So the next day, we go to court. Rigoberta and I walk in, and it's like this. The judge is down here. The women are on this side, and their bank of lawyers, which were all women except one man. And on this side are the 2 soldiers. One was the head of the garrison, and the other was a spy who went throughout the village and turned in terrorists who were murdered. They were on the side with their 2 lawyers who were nasty men. One of them would even scream out things at the woman judge. But this is what we saw when we went in. So the lawyers are here, the women are sitting, behind them. And I come down the stairs, and every one of the women is like this. And for 1 month, this is how they appeared every single day during that trial. They did not want their faces to be seen because they did not want their families to suffer the repercussions. of their daring to take on the Guatemalan military. Every day, more and more Mayan people came to the court, and it was just packed with Mayans from all over the country. And at the end, when the judge made her determination, she found the two men guilty. They were given 270 years in prison. And yeah, outstanding. And the state was required to make reparations, not to the women personally, but to all of the people of the villages from which those women were taken to Sepersarco. It was and is a totally precedent-setting case in the world. It was the first time that soldiers were tried in a domestic court for rape as a weapon of war and found guilty. It was just, I mean, you can imagine, all of the Mayan women were on their feet cheering, and it reverberated around the world in which I work, right? All of the women in the DRC, we work with women who are working to try to stop rape as a weapon of war. The DRC has been called the rape capital of the world. Women are not only raped, they're re-raped. It's so hard to get one's head wrapped around. But we got emails from our colleagues saying, oh, wow, if this happened in Guatemala, maybe it can happen here too. And all of it is due to the resilience of those indigenous women who people expected would keep their mouths shut and go to their grave with those stories. And yet they found the courage and the decision that their example would be used to try to stop the impunity. On days when I, as an activist, get a little sick of it, I kind of go, think of those women from Sepersarco. Think of the courage it took them to pursue this path that took forever to get to court. Think about all that they have gone through. How dare I, who live in relative privilege, get agitated because I'm tired? Those are the kind of women that, to me, are the heroes of the world. They're women that nobody will ever know. In the Nobel Women's Initiative, we are privileged to work with many of them. And their resilience is, to me, they are maybe the germination point of the Me Too, right? If you think about it, they were finally saying Me Too, and it was the Guatemalan military, and enough already, and they actually have received justice. And then that brings me to the Me Too now and the Kavanaugh hearing, which is in some ways an extension. And I remember clearly I was in Sun Valley, Idaho, with 9 women, and we were a panel. And the title was overblown as usual, Extraordinary Women Talking About whatever the hell we talked about. And the Kavanaugh hearing with Dr. Blasey Ford was on. And before we went to the panel, we didn't know how to turn on their huge television. So somebody pulled out their iPhone and were listening to the radio, right? Listening to the testimony, and hard to rip ourselves away to go and speak, And when, of course, Blasey Ford was ignored, and Mr. Trump, when he confirmed Mr. Kavanaugh and apologized on behalf of the American people for the trauma he and his family were put through, many women were totally devastated. Women who have suffered harassment, women who have been raped, women who did not speak out because they knew that if they did, they would be victimized. And then I saw, and of course the women I was with were, all of them, every one of us had had sexual assault. And that wasn't why we were there. It just was coincidental. We're devastated. And one of my students, I teach at Houston. I don't live in Houston, never would. Fly down, teach, leave. One of the students in the class when I teach peace and social justice. One of the students, when I was asking them their response to the Kavanaugh-Blasey Ford hearing, got so agitated and started shaking and had to leave the class. So one can recognize that she has suffered some form of violation. And before she left, she said, we've gone nowhere. We've not gone forward. And I disagree. As hard as it is to say that, I disagree. If there had not been movement forward in terms of gender equality, we wouldn't even have the vote, for God's sake. Women would not be the university president. There would not be more women in university in the US than men these days. In Iran, I think 60% of the student body is female. There has been progress. But for every step forward, of course, those in power who feel threatened push back. And the resilience factor, right after that student left, I was looking at the Washington Post, looking at a couple of op-eds about the Me Too movement and analyzing the Kavanaugh situation in terms of blowback on the Me Too, that men were sick and tired of having to answer for their actions when, growing up it was okay, right? It was okay. What's wrong with you? If I'm coming on to you and touching you and stuff, it's because I think you're pretty. You should be appreciative of the fact that I think you're pretty. But there was a fabulous op-ed, and the title of it was something along the lines of, I am going to place charges in the police station against the man who assaulted me so that in the future he may never get to be a Judge Kavanaugh. And I thought this was a really, really interesting tactic of an overall strategy to try to deal with this, in the sense of, she was heavily criticized for not speaking about it for decades. Her reasoning for not speaking out about it makes perfect sense to any woman who's been harassed or violated. Knowing that if you speak out, you will be the one on trial, even if the perpetrator is in the room. That the perpetrator will go free. 99.9% of the time in the United States, I don't know what it is here, the perpetrator goes free, and the woman's reputation is tarnished when she has been victim. So this woman was suggesting that any woman who is assaulted should go and file a complaint at the police department. The whole story, fingerprints, all the stuff you have to do. Tell friends at that time, write about it in your journal, even if it never goes to court, so that someday, if you are in a Blasey Ford situation and you feel compelled for the good of your nation to speak out, there is record. I thought that was a fantastic, resilient strategy for women who are feeling defeated. And again, I think that's part of the resilience of women, especially when women think together about how we can overcome things that happen to men and women, but we're all intelligent humans in this room. Men have run the system since time immemorial. It's neither good, bad, up, down. It is. It's the reality. So from millennia of that, you begin to develop tools for resilience, for trying to figure out how to shift the power equation even a little bit, and every time you shift, there will be a pushback. But then, with the pushback, you sit back and you think, Okay, what do we do? Okay, here's what was done. What do we now do individually and together to move it forward again? People get freaked out about how slow change is. And I think about it a lot. And I think, good God, when I think about things about myself that I really don't like, and believe me, there are not many, in my perfection as a Nobel laureate, when I turned into Mother Teresa, my perfection knew no bounds. But occasionally when I think of something that agitates me about me, and I think about, okay, I don't like this. What am I going to do to change? Right? And then I do a grand personal strategy, and it lasts for 22 seconds. And I do exactly, what I wasn't going to do. So I sit back, and I try again, and maybe the next time it lasts 44 seconds. But even 5 minutes, oh my God, I have so many jokes to tell. It's terrible. But anyway, the point being, if an individual is challenged changing something about his or her own personality that they really want to change, think about trying to change an entire system that has been in place from forever. When we despair of change, I just sit back, deep breathe, curse a lot, scream a little, and then think about, okay, what do we do? How do we approach the problem, which is, in the vernacular, blowing my skirt up at that particular moment in time? In a more refined way of speaking, it is what fills me with righteous indignation at injustice and makes me have to do something. When I'm angry, there's a difference between anger, in my view, and righteous indignation. I can get angry at my stepdaughters, who I have come to love. It took a long time. Because they think shopping is a basic human right. God bless America. We are no longer called individuals, citizens, people. We are consumers. And every time I say that to my students, listen to what you're saying. From one day to the next, we lost all definition and we're consumers. That is anger. Righteous indignation is about injustice and inequality. And if I feel righteous indignation, I have a flaw of personality that I cannot not do something. I have to try to find some way to contribute, even if it's a little thing. I don't throw myself at every issue or I'd be dead. But there are little ways that every one of us can contribute. I can't say what it is. You think about, what is the thing that most agitates you? Find a way to volunteer in an organization working on it, even if it's only a couple hours a month. I honestly often think about, what would the world be like if everybody who felt righteous indignation at injustice and inequality and wanted to see a world where everybody lived better, even the people we do not like, if we gave a bit of our time to creating that world? Imagine the power of that if each of us just did a little. I will end with thanking everybody for being here today, but also for all those, I'm not going to try to repeat them, because once you start trying to thank individuals and organizations, you forget, and then they feel mad or humiliated or something. But it has been a true pleasure for me to be here in Winnipeg. I've enjoyed every interaction in all of the speaking and interactions with people that I have done here. I appreciate the emphasis on human rights and justice that I have seen here. I hope I can go back sometime. Thanks for having me.
Marvelous. Thanks, Jody Williams. We'll now have some time for some questions.
Sure.
And this is often the second half, which is as good as the first half, because the questions from the audience are always very interesting and a chance to respond. And I would ask, Jason has the microphone. He'll be wandering around, so raise your hand if you want him to bring you the microphone. And I would ask that people keep them brief, because there are a lot of us, and we want to hear our speaker give answers. So thank you.
And introduce yourself, please, if you don't mind.
Hi, my name is Sherry Benson-Podolchuk. Thank you very much, Jody. That was totally awesome. I just want to ask, how do you, when you were all these years, what do you do for self-care? How do you keep yourself grounded so that you can be able to give back and still have, feel good about yourself and still find happiness and also an intimate life when you hear all these horror stories from these women? Thank you.
I've gone through my stages like most lifelong activists that I know. When I first got really involved in the Central America work, El Salvador and Nicaragua during the 1980s, when the US was intervening to support dictatorships, which we're very good at, I was like rabid. I was burning myself out on being rabid about it, and that, you know, not many people cared about Central America and what was happening there. And when I would go home to Vermont for Thanksgiving, my family would be like, she's coming. Let's hope that this time she won't talk about El Salvador and make us feel bad because we're having a nice time together and that we aren't, you know, slitting our wrists over El Salvador. Yeah, they were right, I was wrong. That's one of the things that took me 40 years to learn. Another thing is self-care. I think I can't remember anymore, somewhere between 60 and 65 when I decided to give myself the gift of no work travel in June, July, and August. Because, and this is really the truth, I have not spent an entire calendar year in my home since 1983. And when I think of that, it's like, oh, good God, what have I done, you know? So that was the first step. And then this year, I took 8 months off. And cut off Facebook. I stopped reading the newspaper. I didn't want to ask the question of what has Donnie done today? And I started teaching myself the piano. I take painting lessons. I do encaustic painting, which is painting with hot wax. It's thousands of year old technique. And I'm relearning Italian. And just giving my brain a break from it all, you know, has been good. And I have to say that Liz Bernstein, who is the executive director of Nobel Women's Initiative and was the chair of the landmine campaign after me, is the driving force in making us take care of ourselves. And God bless her for that. And I would recommend in any NGO that you get together and talk about forcing people to take time if they are unwilling. My husband is Steve Goose, the executive director, no, wrong, the director of the Arms Division of Human Rights Watch. We met banning landmines. Goose has been to every meeting on landmines since the day we launched this campaign. And there are times when he's burned out, right? And I say, Goose, don't go. There are, you know, 50 other campaigners that are going to be there. The world will not end if you are not there. And if the campaign collapses because you didn't go to a meeting, it is not a campaign. I mean, I think that's part of what happens to activists too. It's like, I'm a linchpin. If I'm not there, I don't feel that way. I feel like if the Nobel women can't get along without me, we don't have an initiative. We don't, you know, what is it? If the Killer Robot campaign can't get along, if I decide I'm not going to Geneva to listen to diplomats drone on again, if the campaign collapses, this is not a campaign. We have to learn to not take ourselves so seriously. We have to recognize that humor is a really, really, really good thing. And when I'm feeling burned out, I get in bed with a stack of books and I read for a weekend. Not kidding. And Goose and I cook together, and that's fun. I play with my white German Shepherd, Hieronymus Bosch, my Maine Coon cat, who is now 8 months old, and her name is Olive Olivia Catridge. And my other cat, who is a rag doll, and his name is Newman, because he has blue eyes like Paul Newman, one of the most handsome actors in history. My mother had the hots for him. We threatened to put a poster of Paul on the ceiling over her bed. Dad said that was a little too much. Yeah,
Hi there.
stand up.
Hi, my name's Caitlin Thomas.
Put it a little closer.
I'm in the.
Thank you.
I'm a master's student in the Peace and Conflict Studies program, and I want to thank you very much for everything that you've spoken about. I've really enjoyed it. I was wondering if, in particular, you could comment on the Rohingya crisis, in particular Aung San Suu Kyi, and that whole situation, as it's
Sure.
very, very relevant.
The Nobel Women's Initiative did a delegation to Bangladesh to meet with women Rohingya in, I think it was February. I didn't go because it was part of my time off. And even before that time, we were speaking out against her. We embraced the move for the International Criminal Court to investigate, I think it's 6 military who have led and or participated in a huge way in the genocide against the Rohingya population. It is our position that she should be included on that list. She may not be carrying a gun, she may not personally burn down a village or rape the women or kill their babies, but she is complicit in her support of the military. You know, she says glowing things about the Burma, Myanmar military. She is a war criminal. That is our feeling. Nobel women have gone, there have been a series of meetings and strategy meetings at the EU, in Paris. There's another one coming up in Brussels. And we have gone to, make testimony on behalf of the women that we met. It's not our testimony, but we do give our opinion about what we think should, be done with her. She was never a human rights activist. She let the world paint her as such, but she was not herself, never declared herself as a human rights activist.
Jason over there, or over, we've got you.
Hi, my name is Caitlin Blue, and the question I want to ask you is, how do we get everybody to understand that as a collective, that this work that we have to do is important? I think what happens is that a lot of people think that it doesn't affect them directly, so they don't want to talk about it or they don't want to deal about it. So what do you think, how can we convince people that this is for everybody, that human rights, is something that everybody should take up as a fight for them?
If I had the answer to how do we convince human beings to be good human beings, I would be the empress of the universe. I don't know that there is a way to convince everyone. The much beaten to death Margaret Mead quote, "You never underestimate what a handful of activists can do in the world." And I'm not saying this to say don't reach out to the unconvinced, but I don't wait for the unconvinced. When we started the landmine campaign, most of the world was unconvinced. But we started putting together the NGO coalition to begin to educate and change people's opinion. We were able to change enough opinion in the world to, for the first time in history, have a weapon that had been used by every single fighting force in the world banned. So, it was, by diplomatic terms, it was lightning speed. It only took 5 years. That's unheard of. But in the process, we helped educate people about landmines and why they were inappropriate weapons of war. I would argue that all weapons of war are inappropriate, but that's a completely different campaign. So you hope as you go along that you will help people understand. But you can't force people to understand. If I can't help myself change, I sure as hell cannot force somebody else to change. I would say the most useful thing is to have people of a gentle nature reach out to the undecided. I never fell in that category. my husband people call this a good cop and bad cop. And it was not by design. He just knows how to wear a suit and a tie. I mean, I thought he was born in a suit when I, first went out with him. And he knows how to talk to diplomats. He worked on the Hill. So if you want the diplomatic conversation, you send a Steve Goose and a Paul Hannon from Mines Action Canada, and the more gentle of nature. If you need somebody to grab a U.S. colonel by the throat and tell him to F off, which I did, you ask me to, intervene. It takes all kinds there have to be people who really push the envelope to get it to come back to, a point of conversation. I have mellowed with age, but I'm still happy to grab a colonel now and then. Generals too, as a matter of fact. But.
I'm Ed Thompson, and I'm here for Rotary District 5550, one of the representatives. But a couple of things is that in Guatemala, our Rotary District has been involved in 85 schools, and we're looking for $600 for a scholarship for kids down there. So anybody wants to donate to that would be great. But anyways, I wanted to go back. We've also been involved in polio, eradicating polio since 1985. And we spent about $15 billion with us and World Health Organization and others. And that's a lot of money. But I want to put it in perspective. 200 million was pledged this year by the US government, and about 100 million from Canada to eliminate polio. But then I looked at the budgets, military budgets, and they're trillion. It's over $1 trillion in the world. And so I'm wondering why we can't do some kind of thing to the United Nations that would take 10% of the military budget and put it into peace initiatives. And I think in Canada we have a carbon tax that's trying to prevent us from using fossil fuels. Maybe we could use a tax to prevent our governments from spending everything on the military.
I would increase the tax to 50%, but the United Nations, when it was formed after World War II, with the mandate to ensure peace and security in the world, Article 25 of the Charter called upon the military nations of the world, and that would be the victors in World War II, to put together a panel or a group of military and other humans to look at military budgets, look at societal needs, and come up with a plan to diminish the amount of weapons and money spent on war and move that into societal issues, public education, health, all the stuff we all know about. I think they met twice, and then that was it. It never happened, and very few people know about it. And I keep ranting that if the UN itself won't do it, we as civil society should put together a panel, from different NGOs around the world and come up with, figures and then push for it. Some are opposed to a 10% or 20% or 50% tax because they argue that that is validating weapons and war. It's one way of looking at it. I have mixed feelings. My country spends at least 57% of our disposable budget on the military. And that's only a fraction, because all of the upgrade, et cetera, for the nuclear weapons that we were supposed to be getting rid of is buried in the energy department budget. So we have no idea. And then all of I think we have 15 intelligence agencies in the US that we know of. Those budgets are classified. So just imagine how much money is spent on that. And then the rest of the budget is for education, health care, every other thing that human beings need to feel really secure. I don't feel secure because my country is a leader in, creating killer robots. I feel more crazy. I'd feel more secure if everybody had a decent job. If everybody had access to health care. Not just people who can either afford insurance or work in places that give insurance. But the last point about the US, we spend more than the next 9 countries combined on our military, including China, Russia, the UK, Saudi Arabia, and I forget the others, but you know, the big evils are right up there, and we spend more than all of them combined. The reason that is because people don't stand up and say, what do you mean by national security? You know, when a candidate runs for office and says, I'm for national security, nobody ever asks the question, okay, do you support killer robots? Do you support, you know, illegal invasions such as the invasion of Iraq? Do you support XYZ? Do you support 57% of the budget going to the military while our schools are falling apart? You know, until we have an educated population willing to look, it doesn't take long to get the basic facts and challenge candidates and challenge your own government on it, it won't change. The power of the military and the government is huge. They are not going to give that up without people pushing and, you know, bringing about change. And it won't happen in my lifetime. I'm old, but I'm not going to stop fighting for it until, you know, other people, young people like yourself and your daughter, take it up and move it along. Someday it could happen. I believe in the possibility of change. I'm an optimistic pessimist. And what keeps me optimistic is things like the landmine campaign, the women of Sarko, et cetera.
After this, we'll take 2 more questions, if that's fine.
Sure.
Hello, my name is Janet, and I have been interested in studies on peace and conflict.
Could you put the mic on?
Yeah, sure, and hope it's better. And thank you so much for coming and bringing light and humor to hard subjects. And thank you most of all for investing so much energy in finding solutions and infecting all of us with all that very good energy. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
And so you were talking about human security, and which I went to see all your videos, and I was listening to you yesterday night, and I do believe on your beliefs on human security, and you briefly talk about the environment, and I'm curious because I hear that we need is this awareness on where do we invest our money, where do we invest our energy, and rather than separating us and putting distance with armaments, and now you are mentioning those robotic
killer robots.
Yes, it's like putting more distance between all of us, and you're rather more like trying to put all us together, as I understand, with the human security. Anyway, so I was wondering about, for example, the environment. You briefly touched on that, and I think that is a very important subject, as you know, this is our home. And I realize when I think of it that it really takes so much change on the part of humanity, and also in where to invest our energy and our knowledge and our resources. And it's a little bit disturbing to me, maybe because I come from a country where actually the economy is based on the oil production. And I know that we need changes, and I wonder, I don't even know how to start the conversation with my fellow country citizens, because they're gonna hate me. I mean, hopefully no, but I mean, I'm joking about it, but I am just saying, how do we convince of such a big changes? And I'm just thinking of that country, but at the same time, their work depends on that, their resources depends on that. So how do we move to those big changes when, you know, they may somehow disturb too, and how to, you know, like create the momentum actually to move forward? So if you have your views on that.
Oh, well. Oof, sorry, I have a bad back. One thing I would say about environmental work, we peripherally work on it in Nobel Women's Initiative in the sense that we support frontline defenders of the environment. Liz Bernstein, who I mentioned, who's the executive director of Nobel Women, her husband works in the environment, has for years. And he did an interesting study, and I think we all activists need to think about this, talking about environmentalists historically have talked about what they're against. Now, I'm against the fossil fuels, I'm against this, I'm against that, and that's an important part of educating. But he believes that the message has to shift a bit to what are we for? Why are we struggling to save the environment? What is our positive message about change? And I've given that a lot of thought. I haven't incorporated it well yet, but I think that's an important thing to think about. It's like what people are saying about the Democratic Party in my country right now, and I fully agree. What do they stand for? They stand against everything Donald Trump and his minions are, but that's not a platform. I want a platform of what are you going to do and why, right? And it's the same with the environmental movement. Just as in the killer robot issue, the companies and universities and think tanks that are involved in the US military in the development of killer robots earn billions and so many billions of dollars I can't count. As compared to landmines, which was chump change in the military, budget. In terms of the environment, it's also a huge challenge because the forces fighting against people who want to shift how we heat the world, how we do all the stuff that we do with fossil fuels, are faced with some of the biggest corporations on the planet that literally spend hundreds of millions of dollars in propaganda against shifting away from fossil fuel. It's a hard one, obviously. If we don't get it right, we won't be here to worry about it. But some people are calling for a broader coalition that deals with the environment, the military, the this, the that, the other. I think it'd be great, but I think it's a hard one to pull off. I think, with people who are willing to listen, the best thing to start with is facts. This is what's happening here. This is what the companies are paying to make you believe that there's no option, other than fossil fuel, and start educating your base. We were successful in part in the landmine campaign because we honestly knew more about landmines and mine clearance and victim assistance than any government sitting in the negotiating room, because we had NGOs working on every single aspect of the problem. I'm sorry I don't have a brilliant what to do answer. I think it's complicated and multifaceted. One thing I would hope is it doesn't matter what people think of your opinion. And one thing that I learned when I was 13 was that I did not care what people thought about me. And that's hard at 13. It took me a few years to really get it. But I'm not going to live my life as a popularity contest. If you don't like me, that is your problem. If you try to oppress me because of it, then it's my problem too, and I will struggle against that. But in general, if you don't like my message, I'm really sorry. But this is what I believe. I feel good about what I do every single day, and I'm not going to be quiet because it makes you uncomfortable. Mostly people don't like what you say because it makes them begin to think and begin to feel uncomfortable about the choices they're making in their life. So they want you to shut up. Silence is complicity, in my view. If you believe something and don't speak out about it, you're giving your power away. I refuse to give my power away.
Jason? Right beside
Was there one more somewhere?
you. Right over there.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank you for being here and giving me this opportunity. My name is Elizabeth Aluk Andrea, graduate of 2017 from University of Winnipeg, Urban Study and Conflict Resolution. I'm a co-founder of Manitoba Women for Women of South Sudan.
Sorry, shh. They got scared and left. You're the co-founder of, I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
Of Manitoba Women for Women of South Sudan. I'm a South Sudanese woman. Been here for a while. Thank you for Canada to give us opportunity have a second home here and peace of mind. Thank you very much. I was supposed to come to your event yesterday, but I'm a grandmother already, babysitting.
Wow.
I'm very pleased to be here. I know the time is gone. My question would be, you talked earlier about DRC, and we are a neighbor. And I'm sure that you are aware of what is going on in South Sudan.
Yes.
And it's a little voice coming out from there about women and the situation they are going through. Would you be able to share a little bit about your work in South Sudan, or what your knowledge about South Sudan? And how do you and those who are in peace work do something about South Sudan and support women there? Thank you very much.
I can honestly say that at this moment, Nobel Women's Initiative is not working with women's organizations in South Sudan. We have in the past. I've been to South Sudan. So I can't say what we might do. Nobel Women's Initiative only goes into a country if invited by women's organizations, right? And it's to find out from them how we can help by, making the work they do more known, both in their own country and in the world. That's how we work. We don't fund, we have no money. It's just trying to use what we have to, make your voices louder. I know that there are Pan-African women's movements. In fact, there's a meeting in DC day after I get back that I'm not going to, because I'm going to sleep with a bunch of books, that is talking about how women's organizations throughout Africa can, cooperate. And my feeling is, and this is probably something you already know, is that forming a coalition of women's organizations throughout Africa is stronger than each country's women trying to make their issue the most important. When I first worked in El Salvador work, I volunteered a couple hours a week because I was a full-time teacher at that point. And I think I stayed with them for around 9 months. But then I realized that they only wanted to talk about El Salvador, whereas US policy was regional. It wasn't just Salvador, it was putting the CIA in Honduras, it was creating the counter-revolution, in Nicaragua. So if you didn't have a regional mindset, how were you going to be effective in thinking about and strategizing about a response? So I honestly believe the best policy is working with women from the DRC, with women's organizations, from Burundi, from Rwanda, from Uganda, Mozambique, everywhere, so that people understand that, yes, in your country there are specific issues, but continent-wide, there are, uniform issues that women throughout Africa deal with. And then it makes it's hard when an individual organization wants you to suddenly seize their issue if you're already working on lots of issues. Whereas if it's a coalition of women coming and asking, it's easier because you're giving yourself to everybody and trying to raise them all up and help them network with each other. And one of the things that we did, and this will be the last thing I say, one of the things we did in the DRC was help Democratic Republic of Congo women fighting rape as a tool of war to come together for the first time in a DRC-wide conference where they could actually talk to each other, strategize together. I think that's way more effective. It certainly seems longer term, but bringing about sustainable peace is a long-term effort, as you know. Talk to Lema Bowie. You know, her work in Liberia helped her receive the Nobel Peace Prize in helping end the war there, even though the country's still a mess. Thank you very much for your question. I wish I could save South Sudan with you.
Thank you. We're cognizant of time. We have one more question, and then we'll go into the student acknowledgement.
Thank you so much. I'm MJ, and my family is of Métis ancestry, coming right here from the lands that we sit today. And I think it would be remiss for us to not reflect on our Indigenous experience here in Canada and the disposition of lands, the impact it had on men and women of Indigenous descent. And I know that while you're here, you've had some exposure to the conversation happening right here in our city. And mostly, I guess, I would ask for your reflections on how we as women and men who want to make Canada a better place for all peoples, might be able to move forward in this very delicate conversation about missing and murdered Indigenous women. As you may appreciate, Winnipeg is actually a hot spot for the history of women going missing, and our city can be intolerable to Indigenous women. So I would appreciate if we could just reflect a little bit on that, and if you could share some insight with us. Thank you.
I feel like my reservoir of insight is low in the tank. I do know that Nobel, since I have been out of action for a while, blessedly so, Nobel Women's Initiative does do work with First Nation women about the murder of Indigenous women. If you want to get in touch with me, I would be happy to put you in communication with what we're doing. I will not make up what we're doing because I'm clueless at the moment. But we do work with First Nation women on a variety of issues. We led a delegation, a few years back to the tar sands, which people who don't like them call them that, and I forget what they're called, oil sands for people who are more benevolent. We do not fall in the benevolent category. And we met with Indigenous communities where women talked about the cancers that their kids were, all of the problems attendant to the tar sands. And we went along the route where they were hoping to build the pipeline that would take the tar sands bitumen down to the West Coast. And that started our work with First Nation women, and as in every case, our point is to allow the women's voices to be heard, whether they're from the Democratic Republic of Congo, Guatemala, First Nation, and my own country as well, because the voices we always hear are men. No offense, it has to do with the power structures that be. But I think the best thing I can answer right now is please come get my card. I'll give you my card. Please send me an email. I answer my own. And I will continue this conversation in a more meaningful way via email, if that's okay with you. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Professor Williams. I will now call upon two graduate students to say a few words of appreciation, Ms. Anna Christina DeFaria and Father Peter Genger, who are both PhD students based at St. Paul's College at the University of Manitoba and who hold graduate fellowships in the Peace and Conflict Studies program at the University of Manitoba. I will ask them to say just a few words of appreciation.
Good afternoon. My name is Christina De Faria. I'm a PhD student in the Peace and Conflict Studies program at Morrow Center. And on behalf of PAC students, I would like to take a minute to acknowledge the amazing work Professor Jody Williams has been doing over the years and to thank her for the time she took here with us. From protesting the Vietnam War to campaigns to ban landmines, Jody has been an outspoken peace activist, particularly inspiring women worldwide to engage in transformative approaches for peace and leadership. The Nobel Peace Laureate has continued to promote and support the role of women in the peace-building process around the world. And that being said, Jody is an inspired person, and we appreciate the opportunity to learn from her work and experience in the field. We want to take this minute to thank Jody on her active participation in all the events she has been involved with in the past couple of days. Thanks for sharing your time at the Q&A session with students and faculty yesterday. Also, thanks for the enlightening community engagement event last evening. It was a great opportunity to promote the role of women as leaders and peace builders. And of course, thank you for your stimulating lecture this afternoon on supporting women in the pursuit of peace. Thanks for inspiring us and motivating us today to continue in this journey to pursue a better world. Thank you very much.
Thank you. No, thank you, Jody.
Thank you so much for your work.
Don't ever shut up. Silent women do not change the world.
Amen. I got it.
I'm privileged also to speak at this moment. And Jody, honestly speaking, no amount of words, no matter how beautifully they are spoken and arranged, any gesture of appreciation will really fully capture the immense knowledge you have shared with us these few days. Honestly, you spoke without looking into the paper. You really connected with the people, and you aroused our emotion and attracted our concern. And just like Christine said, you have been so wonderful, and you have drawn our insights into understanding that our concern, our interest, our desire for the participation of women in peace building is really reinforced with your presentation. In fact, we do not only condemn the barbarity against women, we have acknowledged their essential role, inextricable presence in peace building. And so I join you in reiterating that position. I'm a researcher on indigenous peacemaking, particularly in Africa. How does indigenous peacemaking contribute in creating peace in Africa and across the world? And I have interaction with the indigenous communities in Canada. I'm from the Mi'kmaq community in the Atlantic area of Canada. There is this common symbol of the smoke pipe or the smoking pipe. You know, we have the stem, we have the bowl, and they are all connected. When you take out one, it is no more a smoking pipe. And that is analogies used in depicting the relationship in social development and peace of the people between men and women. So that if you take out women, then it is like taking out a part of the smoke pipe, and then it is no more a smoke pipe. So the absence of women in peace building is absence of peace. So women are inextricably involved in peace building, and that again you have re-emphasized. So thank you so very much, and on behalf of the audience here, we hold you in our memories forever. Thank you so very much. So I take this moment to invite Sandra Cran to come forward and to present a gift to Jody. Like I did say, no matter the gesture we give you, it won't fully capture the immense knowledge you have shared with us.
Thank you. No, it's been a blast. Good, good. Thank you for
enjoy this.
You made it? I'm to enjoy this. She made it all. I'm going to keep it for myself. I ain't even showing it to you.
She was hoping to trade it for your shawl. Thank you, Sandra Cron. Thank you, Ms. DeFaria and Father Genger. This concludes our afternoon 2018 Saul Kanee and 2018 Night Visitor Lecture. I'd like to thank all of our supporters, including the Richardson Foundation. Just 2 sentences left. Rotary Club 550, World Peace Partners, the University of Manitoba, St. Paul's College and its foundation, and the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. Thank you very much. God bless. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.